Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind cut sharp across the plains near Laramie, curling dust around the boots of a girl who had just been sold. Vera Zeller stood silent beside the wagon, a leather satchel clutched to her chest, her face blank even as her father signed the paper. Her hands trembled, but she kept her shoulders straight. She would not cry. Not for him. Not for this. Take her, her father said, voice slurred from whiskey. That pays off the debt. The man who nodded in return was older, with a jagged scar down his cheek and a stink of tobacco and sweat. His name was Calvin Mott, a ranch foreman known more for breaking horses and women than raising cattle. He reached for Vera's arm like she was a sack of grain. "She ain't a thing," came a voice behind them, low and firm. The stranger stepped down from his horse just as the sun dipped behind the ridge. He wore a trail coat dusted with grit, and his stance was easy but ready, like someone used to trouble and not afraid of it. His eyes rested on Vera a moment longer than the rest, and she could not look away. "Who the hell are you?" Mott snarled. "Truett Talley," the man said. "I own the Twin Pine Ranch just north of here, and I do not much like watching a girl get handed off like a mule over a card debt. You got no say in this?" Vera's father barked, though he swayed on his feet. Truett stepped forward. "That's so? Because I am saying I will take responsibility for the debt. You can either take the money, or I can take this to the sheriff." Mott's lip curled. "She belongs to me now." "No," Truett said. "She does not." Vera blinked, her throat tight. She had not expected anyone to stop it. No one ever had before. Truett reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle of banknotes. "This covers it. You can count it if you want." Mott hesitated, then yanked the money and spat on the ground. "You want her? She's your problem now." He walked off. Her father did not even look at her, just stumbled toward the saloon, already digging for a fresh bottle. Vera stood frozen, the heat gone from her limbs. Truett turned to her. "You all right?" "I do not know," she said. Her voice cracked. "Why did you do that?" "Because it was wrong," he said simply. "And you looked like you needed someone to say so." He helped her up into the saddle of his second horse and tied her satchel behind her. They rode side by side into the twilight, the sky bleeding orange and purple behind them. She said nothing for most of the ride. But when she finally looked over at him, she asked, "You will not sell me too, will you?" "No," Truett said without hesitation. "You are not property. You are free now." She sank a little in the saddle, her shoulders lowering for the first time all day. The Twin Pine Ranch spread wide across a valley rimmed in pines and low hills. It was quiet, well kept, with a little barn, bunkhouse, and a two-story homestead with smoke curling from the chimney. As they rode up, a boy no older than 9 ran out from the barn, waving. "Papa! Papa! You are back!" Truett dismounted and caught the boy mid-leap, laughing as he did. Vera watched the way his face changed, softened. She had not expected him to be a father. "This is Flint," Truett said, setting the boy down. "My son." Flint looked up at Vera, wide-eyed. "Is she staying?" Truett met her gaze. "That is up to her." She did not answer right away. She was too tired, too unsure. But inside the house, the fire burned warm and the table was already set with stew and cornbread. Vera sat at the edge of the meal, her hands folded in her lap, until Flint reached to pass her a biscuit with a shy smile. That night, Truett gave her the extra room upstairs. She lay awake under a soft quilt, staring at the wooden beams above her, trying to remember the last time someone had been kind without wanting something in return. She slept without dreaming. Over the next few days, Vera learned the rhythm of the ranch. She helped with milking, feeding the chickens, and hanging laundry in the sun. She was quiet still, but not silent. Flint followed her like a shadow, asking questions, showing her where the creek ran behind the barn, telling her about the wildflowers that would bloom come spring. Truett never asked anything of her, but he noticed everything. When her hands blistered, he brought salve. When she looked cold, he stoked the fire higher. At supper, he always waited for her to start eating before he did. One afternoon, she watched him work a skittish horse in the corral. His movements were steady and calm, and when the horse finally let him touch its muzzle, Vera felt something twist in her chest. He had not forced the horse into trust. He had earned it. That night, she stood on the porch under the stars, arms wrapped around herself. Truett came out with 2 mugs of coffee and handed her one. "You do not have to stay," he said. "But you are welcome to." Vera looked at him. "Why are you being so kind to me?" He took a long sip before answering. "Because I know what it feels like to be left behind." She watched the wind move through the trees, and for the first time, the tightness in her chest loosened just a little. "I think I would like to stay," she said softly. Truett nodded once, and the silence between them settled easy. In the weeks that followed, Vera began to laugh again. Not often, not loudly, but it came. Flint would grin whenever she did, like it was a gift. Truett noticed too. He watched her with a quiet sort of care that made her stomach flutter and her heart ache in equal measure. One morning, as they walked to the barn, Flint slipped his hand into hers. "You could be my mama if you wanted," he said. Vera stopped, stunned. "Flint," Truett said gently, but the boy just shrugged. "I am just saying." Vera crouched and looked him in the eyes. "That is a very big thing to say." The boy nodded solemnly. "I know, but I think it would be nice." Vera looked up at Truett. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held something steady and warm. She stood slowly. "I think it would be nice too," she said. Truett's breath caught just slightly. And in that quiet moment, something shifted between them. Not spoken, not rushed, but real. And it would only grow from there. A late snow came in April, soft and slow, blanketing the valley in quiet. Vera stood at the window of the kitchen, watching flakes fall past the eaves as she dried the last of the breakfast tinware. The stove still held its heat, and the smell of fried salt pork lingered in the air. Flint had gone to the barn with Truett, dragging his red scarf behind him, his boots too big and his voice carrying like a bird's call. She finished stacking the plates and stepped outside, arms tucked beneath her shawl. The snow muffled the sounds of the ranch, but she could hear low voices from the corral. Truett was showing Flint how to read a horse's ear, how to watch for shift and tension in the flank. Flint listened with the kind of attention Vera remembered never giving her own father. "I can try next?" Flint asked, his breath fogging. "If the mare agrees," Truett said, glancing at her as she approached. "Morning's quiet. She may let you." Vera leaned on the fence. "You speak to them like they're kin." "They're honest," he said, his hand resting easy on the mare's neck. "You don't get that from many folks." "You always been around horses?" she asked. He nodded. "Since I could walk. My uncle ran a post station near Fort Laramie. Took me in when I was 9. Gave me a brush and a rope and told me to earn my keep." She watched the way his fingers moved through the horse's mane, slow and sure. "Was he kind?" "No," Truett said. "But he taught me what I needed and I learned the rest myself." She didn't ask more. Instead, she turned to Flint, who stood with his hands balled at his sides. "You ready?" she asked him. He nodded solemnly. Truett stepped aside, letting Flint approach the horse with careful steps. Vera held her breath as the mare watched the boy, ears twitching. Flint stretched out his hand just as Truett had shown him and waited. The mare lowered her head an inch. Then another. "She's saying hello," Truett said. Flint beamed. Vera looked at Truett and smiled, not from her mouth, but from somewhere deeper. Later that afternoon, Vera sat at the sewing table in the front room, patching the elbow of one of Flint's shirts. The fabric was thin, and her stitches weren't perfect, but she was learning. She hadn't sewn for anyone since her mother's funeral when she was 13. Her fingers remembered what her heart had tried to forget. Truett came in, shaking snow from his shoulders. He hung his coat by the door and nodded toward the shirt. "He's hard on clothes," he said. "He's 9, she replied. "It's his job." He watched her for a moment. "You're good with him." She threaded the needle again. "I never thought I would be." "Why?" "I was always told I was too quiet. Not easy to like. Not enough of anything." Truett sat across from her, elbows on his knees. They were wrong. She met his eyes, surprised by the certainty in his voice. You don't say things unless you mean them, do you? No, he said. I don't. The wind rattled the windows. She returned to her stitching, but her hands moved slower. That night, after Flint had gone to sleep and the fire was low, Vera stepped onto the porch again. The snow had stopped, leaving the world muted and white under a pale moon. Truett joined her without a word, handing her a tin cup of warm cider. I've been thinking about spring calves, he said. Might need to hire on help come May. She looked at him. You don't think I'll stay? I don't want to assume. She sipped the cider. I never had a reason to stay anywhere before. You do now. She turned toward him. I think I might. Truett didn't answer right away. He looked out over the fields, the moonlight catching the edge of his jaw. I'd like that, he said. Vera felt something settle in her chest, then quiet, steady, and wholly new. Inside, the fire crackled. Flint turned in his sleep. And outside, the ranch held its breath beneath the snow, waiting for the thaw. By late May, the river had swollen with snowmelt, and the cottonwoods along the banks unfurled pale green leaves that quivered in the wind. Vera stood barefoot in the kitchen doorway, her hem damp from gathering wild onions near the creek. She held the small basket close, her eyes following a hawk as it circled over the hills beyond the pasture. Flint's laughter echoed from the field where he chased a bandy-legged calf that had slipped the fence. Truett was ahead of him, moving slow so as not to spook the creature, his hat tipped low to shield against the rising sun. Vera watched them a moment longer, then stepped back inside, setting the basket on the table beside a crock of buttermilk. She'd begun cooking without being asked, not out of obligation, but because it felt right. Familiar. Her mother had taught her to season with a pinch between the fingers, to judge heat by the sound of the skillet. Vera had forgotten she knew how to measure silence, how to fill a room with care that didn't need to be spoken. When the sun reached its peak, Flint came in flushed and dusty, clutching a feather he'd found by the water trough. Can I keep it? He asked, holding it up. Only if you wash your hands before dinner, Vera said, handing him a damp cloth. He groaned but obeyed, and Truett followed a few minutes after, the smell of horses and sun-dried grass heavy on his clothes. He took off his hat and stood just inside the door, watching her. You always know what to cook before I'm hungry, he said. She didn't look up from the skillet. You're easier to read than you think. I doubt that, he said, folding his arms. Vera turned, brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. You keep to yourself, but you wear your tired around the eyes. And when you're thinking too hard, you tap your thumb. Truett blinked, then glanced down at his hand. His thumb rested against his forefinger, still. I didn't know I did that, he said. You do, she replied, setting the skillet aside. You're not as hidden as you believe. After Flint had gone outside to check on a robin's nest he'd found in the fence post, Truett leaned against the counter and watched her fold the cloth napkins. You ever think about going back? He asked. Vera's hands stilled. Back where? Wherever you came from. She shook her head slowly. There's nothing there for me. Just names I don't say and places I don't miss. He didn't press. Instead, he reached toward the stack of napkins and ran his hand along the edge of one. I've been thinking about the bunkhouse, he said. It's too crowded come branding season. I could build a room off the back porch. For an extra hand? She asked. His voice lowered. For you. If you'd rather not stay upstairs anymore. Vera met his eyes. You'd build something just for me? I've built plenty with sore hands and bad wood. This wouldn't be for work. It'd be for keeping. She didn't answer right away. Her chest felt tight, not with fear, but with a kind of fullness that scared her more. I don't need a room of my own, she said. Truett took a slow breath. What do you need, then? She stepped closer, her apron brushing his sleeve. To know I belong somewhere without asking. You do, he said. You've belonged since the first time you told Flint he was tracking mud in. Vera laughed, quiet and unsure. That's the moment? It was the way you said it, like you'd been here years. She looked up at him, the light behind her catching the faint scar above his brow. It was old, faded, a reminder of something he'd lived through. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her, what marks she carried without knowing. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of lilac from the bush near the well. Vera stepped back, clearing her throat. "I should check the wash," she said. Truett nodded, but didn't move from the counter. As she passed him, his hand brushed hers. Just once, deliberate and light. That evening, they sat on the porch while Flint braided twine for a slingshot. Truett whittled a fence peg, and Vera carded wool Flint had gathered from the barbed wire where sheep had passed through weeks before. The quiet between them was easy, marked only by the rasp of Truett's knife and the rustle of Flint's fingers at work. "You don't say much about what you want," Truett said, not looking up. "I've spent too long not being asked," she replied. "I'm asking now." Vera rested the carding brush on her lap. "I want to stay where I'm not looked at like I'm broken." "You're not," he said. She turned toward him fully. "You don't know what's been done to me. I don't have to. I know what you choose to be now." Vera swallowed. "And what's that?" He met her eyes. Steady, brave, Flint's compass. "My reason." The wool slipped from her hands. Flint looked up, puzzled. "You all right?" Vera picked it up gently. "Yes," she said. "Just dropped something." But her hands were trembling. That night, she stood at the window of her room, watching the stars gather over the ridge. She didn't light her lamp. She didn't need to see her reflection to know she wasn't the same girl who'd stepped into this house with blistered feet and nothing to her name. She turned away from the window, tucked the wool into the basket by the bed, and climbed beneath the quilt. As she closed her eyes, she whispered a name into the dark, not her father's, not her past. Truett. The wind outside settled, and inside, she slept without fear. The sun rose early over the ridge, casting a thin gold light across the back pasture. Truett had been up before dawn, riding fence along the north edge where the snowmelt had undercut a corner post. He returned with his coat soaked to the elbow and a knot in his shoulder from hauling new rails into place. When he stepped into the kitchen, Vera was already there, flour on her wrists, hair pinned back in a hurried twist that left a few strands curling at her neck. She didn't look up as he entered. "You left before I could ask what you needed mended." "I didn't want to wake anyone," he said, removing his hat and setting it on the bench by the door. "Fence went loose near the bluff. I'll need to brace it better come next week." She wiped her hands on a cloth. "I could help you with that. I remember how to splice a rail." He leaned against the doorway, watching her. "Where'd you learn that?" "Old woman I stayed with a while in Uinta County. She kept goats and swore every problem could be fixed if you just tied it tight enough." Truett gave a quiet laugh. "She sounds like someone I'd get along with. She'd have chewed your ear off for coming in soaked." "Here." Vera stepped forward and pressed a dry rag into his hand. Her fingers brushed his. "You'll catch cold." He didn't move. "Vera." She met his gaze. "I'd like to take a ride with you. Just us." She hesitated. "Where?" "There's a spot near the foothills. Wild mint grows thick there this time of year. I thought you might like it." "What about Flint?" "Mrs. Hawley's stopping by this morning for eggs. She said she'd keep him with her until supper." Vera folded the cloth slowly. "All right, let me change." They rode out just after 7, the horses picking their way along a trail that wove through open grassland and into a stand of fur. Vera's mare, a roan Truett had gentled himself, moved easy under her. She sat straight in the saddle, quiet, her eyes scanning the trees as if memorizing every bend of the trail. The grove opened out into a sloping meadow dotted with pale blue blossoms and low brush. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Truett dismounted first, tying his gelding to a narrow tree, then turned to help Vera down. "I can manage," she said, sliding free before he could reach her. He studied her boots, now dusted with pollen. "You always do." They walked side by side through the clearing, shoes brushing the mint that crept wild through the grass. Bees moved lazily above the stalks, and somewhere bird calls echoed through the trees. "I never thought to see a place like this," Vera said. "Not in this land." "You mean Wyoming?" "I mean anywhere where I'm not waiting to be sent away." He crouched to run a hand through the mint. "I used to come here when my uncle got drunk. Sometimes I'd stay all day just listening to the wind." She knelt beside him, fingers lightly touching a cluster of leaves. "You never said you were raised rough." "I wasn't planning to." "Then why tell me now?" "Because I want you to know I see you. Not just what you've done since you came here, but the woman who's still trying to believe she deserves to stay." Vera looked down at her hands, dirt under the nails, the skin along her knuckles toughened from work. "I don't know how to stop waiting for someone to take it all away." "No one's coming," Truett said, his voice low. "There's nothing left to take." She sat back on her heels, eyes on the tree line. "I used to dream about running a place like this, not owning it, just being somewhere that didn't feel borrowed." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and took out a small tin. When he opened it, the inside held a narrow silver ring, plain but carefully made. "I traded for this from a blacksmith down near Rawlins," he said. "Didn't know if I'd ever use it." Vera stared at the ring, then at him. "Why bring it now?" "Because I'm not asking for an answer today. But I want you to know I'm not going anywhere. And I want you to have a choice." She didn't reach for it. Not yet. But her eyes filled in a way he hadn't seen before, not with fear or weariness, but something softer. "You mean it?" "I do." She looked at the ring again, then back at the horses grazing at the edge of the meadow. "I'd like to stay," she said. "You already said that once." "This time I mean forever." Truett didn't move to touch her. He just sat there, letting the moments settle between them like dust in sunlight. When they rode back, Vera carried the tin in her coat pocket, the metal warm against her side. She didn't speak about it, and Truett didn't press. But when they passed the bend in the trail where the creek split in two, she reached across the saddle space between them and brushed his hand once, slow and sure. And Truett, who had never asked for more than what he could earn, understood what that small touch meant. The world wasn't borrowed anymore. It was theirs. The final Sunday of June brought a stillness to the land. The wind softened to a hush, and the air hung heavy with the scent of sweetgrass and distant rain. Vera stood at the edge of the orchard, her skirts brushing clover, a basket looped over one arm. She reached for an early apple, not yet ripe but firm enough for baking, and ran her thumb over its skin. Behind her, the lowing of cattle drifted from the southern field, and the occasional bark of a dog echoed near the creek. Everything felt suspended, as if the world were listening. Truett approached from the lane that wound past the grain shed. His shirt was damp at the collar and dust streaked his trousers, but his step was light. Vera turned as he neared, one brow lifted. "You're back early." "Fence held," he said. "Didn't need as much mending as I thought." "I stopped by the carpenter's mill on the way back." She set the apple in the basket. "For what?" "They finished the pieces I ordered. Doors cut and the frame square. It'll fit clean off the porch." Vera glanced toward the house. "You're still building it, then?" "I am. But only if you still want it." She looked at him a long moment, then nodded once. "I do." They walked back together, the silence between them filled with quiet understanding. When they reached the porch, Flint was crouched beside a shallow crate, inspecting a hen that had gone broody too early. "She won't let me near the eggs," he said, frowning. Truett knelt beside him. "She's guarding. Let her be. You wouldn't like it if someone reached into your bed either." Flint wrinkled his nose. "I guess not." Vera crouched too, resting the basket on the step. "Let's gather the rest from the coop. She can keep those." Flint nodded and followed her, and Truett rose, watching them go. The boy's hand slipped into Vera's without thought, and she didn't pull away. That evening, Vera stood at the table, rolling out dough while the stove ticked with heat. Truett came in carrying a bundle wrapped in oilskin. He set it down gently near her elbow. This came with the rest of the lumber. She peeled back the cloth and found a small iron latch, simple and sturdy, with a carved pinecone detail on the handle. She ran her fingers over it. "You had this made? I told the blacksmith you liked the ones on the barn doors. Figured it should be yours." Vera looked up at him, her eyes wide with something unspoken. "You remember things I barely say. I listen." She turned the latch in her hand. "I never thought I'd have a door of my own to close. Or open." Truett rested his hand lightly on hers. "You'll have every door you want." Later, when Flint had gone to bed and the last of the firewood was stacked, Truett found her sitting on the back step, arms folded over her knees. Fireflies blinked low in the grass, and the moon hung full above the pines. He sat beside her and didn't speak for a while. "I was thinking," she said, her voice hushed, "about that ring." He waited. "I kept it in my apron pocket all week. Every time I touched it, I felt steadier. Like it meant something even before I said yes." He turned to her, his profile silvered by moonlight. "Do you want to say yes now?" "I already have," she said, "but I'll say it again." She held out her hand. Truett took the tin from his coat, opened it without a word, and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit without effort. She turned her hand so the metal caught the light, then pressed her palm to his chest. "I've never belonged to anything that didn't hurt," she said. "Until now." He leaned forward, resting his brow against hers. "You belong to this land. To Flint. To me." She closed her eyes. "And you belong to me." They didn't kiss right away. It wasn't hurried or claimed. It was slow, quiet, and sure, like the land beneath them, like the life they'd begun to build in the rhythm of days and the hush of long evenings. They married a week later beneath the lone cottonwood near the creek. Mrs. Hawley stood as witness. Flint held the ring, and Truett wore his best shirt, the one he only ever used for county meetings or funerals. Vera stitched lace into the collar of her dress the night before, her hands steady with purpose. After the vows were spoken, she bent to Flint and kissed his forehead. "You're mine too," she said. He puffed his chest with solemn pride and handed her a folded paper he'd written himself, a drawing of the three of them standing beneath a sun with too many rays. The days that followed were full, but not rushed. The porch room was never built. Vera moved her few things into Truett's room instead, and they shared the bed she had once passed by with wary eyes. Flint's laughter filled the halls each morning. The barn cat had kittens, and Vera named each one. She planted sage along the porch steps and hung lavender from the rafters in the kitchen. Truett built her a shelf for her books, low enough that Flint could reach them too. At night, they read by lamplight, Vera tracing each word with her fingertip as Flint followed along. Nothing grand changed, but everything did. One warm evening in September, Vera stood in the doorway of the house, watching the sun set behind the ridge. Truett came up behind her, his arms sliding around her waist as she leaned back into him. "I was thinking," he said, his voice low against her ear, "we should add a second henhouse next spring." Vera smiled. "We'll need more hands." "We'll have more," he said. "In time." She rested her hand over his. "Whatever comes, I'm ready." His lips brushed her temple. "So am I." And as the last light dipped below the hills, Vera closed her eyes and let the quiet hold her. She had come from nothing, from weight and silence and hands that only ever took. But here she had built something with love. And she knew, without question, it would hold.